Johnny Carson invited his daughter onto The Tonight Show in 1985. He thought it would be a sweet father-daughter moment. Instead, she told the truth about growing up with an absent father, and Johnny broke down on live television in front of 18 million people. It was October 15th, 1985, and Johnny Carson was at the peak of his career. He'd been hosting The Tonight Show for 23 years, had won multiple Emmy Awards, and was America's undisputed king of late-night television. He was beloved, trusted, invited into millions of homes every night. But there was one home where he'd never really been present: his own. Corey Carson was 26 years old and had barely spoken to her father in over a decade. She wasn't estranged in the dramatic sense. There had been no big fight, no terrible betrayal. It was worse than that. There was just absence. A father who was there in name but never in presence. A man who could charm 20 million strangers every night but couldn't connect with his own daughter. The invitation to appear on The Tonight Show came as a surprise to Corey. Johnny's producer had called her personally, explaining that Johnny wanted to do something special, a segment celebrating his children. It would be warm, funny, a chance for America to see the softer side of Johnny Carson. They'd talk about childhood memories, share some laughs, maybe look at old photos. It would be healing, the producer suggested, a chance to reconnect. Corey almost said no. She'd built a life that didn't revolve around being Johnny Carson's daughter. She had a career in social work, helping families navigate difficult transitions. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days helping other people's families, while her own remained fractured. But something in her wanted to try. Maybe this could be different. Maybe this public platform would force the honest conversation they'd never had in private. What Corey didn't know was that Johnny had a specific vision for this segment. He'd been thinking about his legacy lately, about what he'd leave behind when The Tonight Show eventually ended. He wanted to show that he wasn't just a television host. He was a father, a family man. He imagined Corey would share sweet memories about birthday parties he'd thrown, vacations they'd taken, life lessons he'd taught. It would humanize him, soften his image, show depth beyond the monologues and celebrity interviews. He had no idea he was about to get something completely different. The night of the taping, Corey sat in the green room feeling her heart race. She'd decided during the drive to the studio that she wouldn't lie. If this was going to mean anything, it had to be honest. She'd spent too many years pretending everything was fine, making excuses for her father's absence, protecting his image at her own expense. Her therapist had encouraged her to set boundaries, to speak her truth. Her friends had warned her it might backfire, that confronting Johnny Carson on live television could turn her into a villain in America's eyes. But Corey didn't care anymore. She was tired of protecting a man who'd never protected her childhood. She looked at herself in the mirror and practiced what she might say. "Tell the truth," she whispered to her reflection. "Just tell the truth." A makeup artist came in to powder her face, chatting cheerfully about how exciting it must be to be on her father's show. Corey smiled and nodded, not having the heart to explain that she'd rather be anywhere else, doing anything else, than sitting across from the man who'd chosen fame over fatherhood. If Johnny wanted her on his show, he was going to get the real Corey, not the sanitized version he imagined. When Johnny introduced her to the studio audience, his voice was warm with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing something very special tonight. I'd like you to meet my daughter, Corey Carson." The audience applauded enthusiastically as Corey walked out. She looked poised, professional, beautiful. Johnny stood to hug her, and for a moment, to everyone watching, it looked like a perfect father-daughter reunion. Johnny's smile was genuine. He was proud of how she'd turned out, even if he couldn't take much credit for it. They sat down, and Johnny started with what he thought was an easy question. "So, Corey, tell everyone what it was like growing up as Johnny Carson's daughter." Corey looked at her father for a long moment. In that pause, something shifted in the studio. People who knew Johnny well, Ed McMahon standing off to the side, the crew who'd worked with him for years, felt a sudden tension. This wasn't going to go the way Johnny expected. "Honestly," Corey said, her voice steady, "I don't know what it was like to grow up as Johnny Carson's daughter. I know what it was like to grow up as Corey Carson, daughter of a man named Johnny who was rarely home. But Johnny Carson, the TV host? I watched him like everyone else did, on television. The studio audience went silent. This wasn't the sweet reminiscence they'd been promised. Johnny's smile flickered but held. He thought maybe she was setting up a joke, building to some funny punchline. Well, I was working a lot, he said, trying to keep it light. The show keeps pretty demanding hours. You were working every night, Corey said, and every day, and every weekend, and on my birthday, and on Christmas, and when I graduated high school, and her voice caught slightly, when I really needed you. Johnny's face changed. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked like panic. This wasn't the script. This wasn't what they'd planned, but they were live. Cameras were rolling, and 18 million people were watching his daughter tell the truth he'd been avoiding for decades. Corey, Johnny started, but she kept going. I don't want to embarrass you, Corey said, and her tone was kind but firm. I really don't, but you invited me here, and I think you wanted me to tell everyone what a great dad you were, and I can't do that, because it wouldn't be true. The control booth was in chaos. The director was frozen, unsure whether to cut away, go to commercial, do something, anything, to save Johnny from this moment. But he couldn't. This was too real, too important. America needed to see this. Johnny Carson, for maybe the first time in his career, had no idea what to say. His carefully constructed persona, the quick wit, the perfect timing, the ability to handle any situation with charm, completely deserted him. He just sat there, looking at his daughter, and the cameras captured every second of his discomfort. I remember being 7 years old, Corey continued, her voice stronger now, and having a recital. I played the piano, badly probably, but I was so excited because you said you'd come. I kept looking at the back of the auditorium, waiting for you to walk in. You never did. Mom said you had to work. That became the excuse for everything. Dad has to work. Dad's very important. Dad's very busy. And I believed it because I was 7. She paused, wiping her eyes. The audience was completely still. Some people were crying. But then I got older, and I realized that work was just the word you used for not wanting to be here. You weren't just busy, Dad. You were absent by choice. You could have made time. You just didn't. Johnny's hands were shaking. He gripped the arms of his chair, trying to maintain some composure, but his face was crumbling. Tears were forming in his eyes, and he was making no effort to hide them. I used to watch you on TV every night, Corey said, and now she was crying too. I'd watch you laugh with your guests, watch you be warm and funny and present with complete strangers, and I'd think, why can he do that with them and not with me? What's wrong with me that my own father would rather talk to celebrities than come to my piano recital? Nothing, Johnny said, and his voice cracked completely. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing was ever wrong with you. Then why? Corey asked, and it was the question she'd been holding for 26 years. Why did you choose them over me? Over us? The show went to commercial. It had to. Johnny Carson was openly crying, unable to speak, and his daughter was crying across from him, and the whole thing was too raw, too real for network television. In those 3 minutes of commercial break, something happened that nobody expected. Johnny stood up, walked over to Corey, and sat down next to her on the guest couch. When the cameras came back on, America saw Johnny Carson sitting beside his daughter, holding her hand, his face streaked with tears. When we come back from commercial, Johnny said, his voice shaking, I need to answer my daughter's question, because she deserves an answer, and maybe America deserves to hear it too. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. They chose silence, the respectful kind, the kind you give when you're witnessing something sacred. When the show returned, Johnny looked directly at Corey. He wasn't performing anymore. He wasn't Johnny Carson, television host. He was just John William Carson, a father who'd failed his daughter, trying to explain the unexplainable. I was terrified of you, Johnny said, and the admission hung in the air like a bomb. I was terrified of all my children, because being a father required real emotion, real vulnerability, real presence. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't learn it from my father. He was cold, distant, couldn't show affection, and I swore I wouldn't be like him, but I became something worse. I wasn't cold, I was just absent. Corey listened, still holding his hand. This show, Johnny continued, gesturing to the studio around them. This show was safe. I had writers, I had scripts, I had a character to play. I could be funny and charming and never have to be real. But being your father meant being real. It meant being vulnerable. It meant risking that you'd see me, really see me, and decide I wasn't enough. He wiped his face with his free hand. So I hid. I used work as an excuse to avoid the thing that terrified me most, being a real father. And in doing that, I robbed you of having a dad, and I robbed myself of knowing you. Corey was crying harder now, but she squeezed his hand. I just wanted you to show up, Dad. That's all I ever wanted. Just show up. I know, Johnny said. I know. And I didn't. And I'm so sorry. What happened next surprised everyone. Corey leaned over and hugged her father, not a quick, polite hug, but a real one. A long, tight embrace between two people who'd been strangers trying to become family. And Johnny Carson, who never showed real emotion on television, who'd built his career on emotional distance, held his daughter and sobbed openly in front of 18 million people. The audience didn't applaud. They just watched, many of them crying themselves. This wasn't entertainment. This was witnessing a father and daughter trying to heal decades of hurt in real time. When they finally pulled apart, Johnny looked at the camera. I don't know how many of you watching have relationships you've neglected, people you've hurt by not showing up. But let me tell you something. It's never too late to try. It might be awkward, it might be painful, but it's worth it. He turned back to Corey. I can't give you back those piano recitals I missed. I can't redo your childhood. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try being your father now. Not the TV version, the real one. Corey nodded through her tears. I'd like that. The show eventually moved on to other segments, but nobody really remembers what came after. What they remember is Johnny Carson, America's most controlled, most professional host, falling completely apart because his daughter had the courage to tell him the truth. The aftermath of that episode was extraordinary. NBC received over 10,000 letters in the following week. Some criticized Johnny for airing his personal life so publicly, but most were from parents thanking him for being honest, from adult children who recognized their own fractured relationships, from families inspired to have difficult conversations they'd been avoiding. Johnny and Corey's relationship did change after that night. They started having weekly dinners. No cameras, no audience, just a father and daughter learning to know each other. Johnny cut back on his work schedule, started showing up for family events, started being present in ways he never had before. Years later, in an interview after Johnny's death, Corey reflected on that night. It was the hardest thing I ever did, she said, standing up to my father on national television, telling him he'd failed me. But it was also the best thing I ever did, because it gave us a chance to start over, those last 7 years before he retired, and then the years after, I finally got to know my dad. The real one, not the TV version. She paused, wiping her eyes. And he was worth knowing. Underneath all that fear and distance, he was kind and funny and caring. I just wish we'd found him sooner. The episode became a landmark moment in television history, not because it was entertaining, but because it was real. It showed that even America's most beloved host was human, flawed, capable of failure, and more importantly, it showed that it's never too late to try to do better. Johnny Carson spent 30 years being perfect on television, but the night he fell apart in front of his daughter was the night he was finally real. And that moment of vulnerability, of honest reckoning with his failures, meant more than 3 decades of perfectly executed monologues. If this story of courage, honesty, and second chances moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who might need the courage to have a difficult conversation. Have you ever confronted someone who hurt you and found healing on the other side? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video for more untold stories about the real people behind entertainment's greatest legends.